The Saturday afternoon chaos of the Chicago superstore was a symphony of modern indifference. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glare on aisles overflowing with merchandise, a stark contrast to the grey, slushy streets outside. The air was thick with the cacophony of commerce, the squeal of misaligned shopping cart wheels, the tinny voice of a sale announcement blaring from the PA system, and the low murmur of dozens of conversations colliding into a single, impersonal drone. Families pushed carts mounded high with colourful boxes of snacks and gadgets, their laughter echoing a carefree abundance. Just a few feet away, others stood clutching a handful of necessities, their faces etched with the quiet tension of a carefully calculated budget. It was a place where everyone was together, yet profoundly alone, a perfect microcosm of a world that had forgotten how to see the person standing right next to it. Among the throng was Arthur Blackwood, though no one would have recognized the titan of industry in the stooped figure he presented. He wore a frayed coat that had seen better decades and scuffed shoes that spoke of long, weary miles. His disguise was more than just clothing. It was an embodiment of the emptiness he felt inside. His gaze was intentionally distant, his movements slow and deliberate, projecting a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to show in over 40 years. He approached the checkout lane with just 3 items in his hands: a simple loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a small bag of coffee. These were not items of choice but of necessity, the humble staples of a life lived on the margins. He placed them on the conveyor belt, his hands trembling slightly. A performance so convincing it had begun to feel painfully real to him. The cashier scanned the items, her movements sharp with impatience. The total was $12.50. Arthur presented a worn debit card. A harsh beep sliced through the air. "Declined!" she announced, loud enough for the entire line to hear as she rolled her eyes. Playing his part, Arthur asked her to please try again. That's when the manager, Mark, a man whose ambition was poorly disguised by a cheap suit, intervened. "Sir, there's a long line here," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "If you can't pay, please step aside. You're holding things up." A ripple of impatient sighs went through the queue. The public shame was a cold, heavy weight, and Arthur's cynical experiment felt painfully real. It's a feeling of being made invisible that so many know. And if these stories resonate with you, subscribing helps us continue to give them a voice. A few feet away, the rhythmic sound of a mop swishing across the linoleum floor came to a halt. Maria Flores stood still, her hands resting on the worn wooden handle. Her simple work uniform was neat but faded, and exhaustion had settled into the fine lines around her eyes. Yet those eyes held a light that no amount of hardship had managed to extinguish, a deep well of unwavering kindness. She had been on the periphery, a figure most customers didn't even register as she kept their path clean. But she saw everything. She saw the cashier's dismissive gesture, she heard the manager's cruel words, and most importantly, she saw the profound hurt flicker across the old man's face. In that moment, he wasn't a nuisance or a problem holding up the line. To Maria, he was a human being crushed by the casual indifference of the world, and it stirred something deep within her. Ignoring the manager's disapproving glare, Maria moved toward the register, her steps quiet but deliberate. Her focus was entirely on the old man, whose shoulders were slumped in defeat. From the pocket of her simple uniform, she pulled a small, worn wallet, its leather cracked and faded from years of use. She carefully counted out a $10 bill and a handful of coins, the exact amount she had set aside for her own lunch. She placed the money on the counter with a soft finality that left no room for argument. The cashier, momentarily stunned, accepted the payment. Maria then took the plastic bag containing the bread, milk and coffee and gently placed it in Arthur's trembling hand. "Take care, sir," she said, her voice a soft anchor in the sea of noise. "We all have tough days." Arthur stood frozen, the weight of the bag in his hand feeling immense. a physical manifestation of the kindness he had just received. The phrase, "we all have tough days," echoed in his mind, not as a hollow platitude, but as a profound bridge of shared human experience. With that one simple, selfless act, Maria had done more than just pay for his groceries. She had smashed the thick, cold wall of cynicism he had spent years constructing around his heart. He looked into her eyes, which were tired, yet held a light he recognized with a painful jolt. It was the same light he used to see in his late wife, Eleanor, who had always insisted that goodness was a quiet, constant current running beneath the world's noisy surface. For the first time in a decade, Arthur felt a hopeful crack in his emotional armor. Maria returned to her mop and bucket as if nothing remarkable had occurred, her movements methodical and calming. For her, it was not a grand gesture, but simply the right thing to do, an instinct honed by a lifetime of quiet struggle. She remembered her own mother skipping meals so she and her brother could eat, the silent sacrifices made in the name of love and dignity. She saw that same battle reflected in the old man's eyes, that familiar flicker of shame that surfaces when the world coldly reminds you of what you lack. Paying for his items was a small act of defiance against the indifference she often faced. As she worked, she thought of her son, Leo, and the one lesson she hoped he would always remember, that a person's true value is measured by how they treat others, not by what they own. Arthur left the superstore in a daze, the cacophony of the city streets fading into a muted background hum. He bypassed his waiting limousine, choosing instead to walk for blocks, the cold Chicago wind biting at his face. Though he barely felt its sting, his mind was a tempest of gratitude and a profound, gnawing guilt over his deception. This woman, who clearly had so little, had given so freely and without hesitation. He, who possessed so much, had offered nothing but a lie. How could he possibly repay a debt that had nothing to do with money? Writing a check felt obscene, a crude insult to the purity of her action. It would reduce her profound kindness to a mere transaction, cheapening the very thing that had managed to stir his dormant soul. He had to do something meaningful, something that truly honored the dignity she had so freely given him. The next day, Arthur returned to the store, once again shrouded in his disguise. He didn't want to alarm her with a sudden change. He just wanted to understand her life, to find a way to help that was genuine and respectful. He located her in the cleaning supply closet, where she was meticulously organizing bottles and rags. He approached cautiously, his voice soft as he offered a simple, "Thank you for what you did yesterday." Maria looked up, a flicker of recognition in her eyes quickly followed by a veil of suspicion. "It was nothing," she replied, her tone polite but distinctly guarded. She was accustomed to being invisible in the bustling store, and this sudden, focused attention from a stranger was unsettling. Her life was a precarious balance, and she had learned that unexpected kindness often came with hidden costs. Their quiet exchange was abruptly shattered when Mark, the manager, rounded the corner. His eyes narrowed as he saw Arthur speaking with Maria, and his face soured with immediate disapproval. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his sharp tone directed entirely at Maria, as if she were the source of the disruption. "Is this man bothering you?" Before Arthur could explain, Mark cut him off, pointing a finger at him. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, and you," he spat, turning his glare on Maria, "get back to work. We don't pay you to socialize with customers, especially not the ones who can't even afford to be here." The unspoken threat of termination hung heavy in the air, and Maria's face flushed with a mixture of anger and fear. A surge of cold, calculated fury washed over Arthur, a familiar feeling from his years in the boardroom. He saw in Mark the very embodiment of the corporate soullessness he had come to despise, a system he himself had helped to build. It was a machine that prized profit margins over people, viewing employees like Maria as nothing more than disposable cogs. He turned and walked away, not because Mark had ordered him to, but because he understood his current approach was fundamentally flawed. His disguise, which he had intended as a tool to uncover truth, had become a liability, putting the very person he wanted to help in jeopardy. To truly make a difference, he had to stop playing the part of a poor old man. He had to become Arthur Blackwood again, the man with the power to dismantle these very systems of casual cruelty. That evening, in the cavernous silence of his mansion, Arthur sat by the fireplace, a framed photograph of Eleanor resting in his hands. He traced the outline of her smile, the one that always reached her eyes, and could almost hear her gentle voice. She would have admired Maria's strength, her quiet grace, and her unwavering compassion. His experiment was officially over. He had set out to find a single spark of light in the darkness, and he had found a beacon, but simply finding it was not enough. He now had a responsibility to protect it, to nurture it, and to ensure it could burn even brighter. This was no longer about proving a cynical point. It was about honoring a legacy, both Eleanor's and the one Maria was unknowingly building with every small, selfless act of kindness. His internal conflict raged. Simply giving Maria a large sum of money would be easy, but it would also be a profound failure. It would be an act of charity, not an act of justice. He vividly recalled the sting of humiliation he felt at the checkout, a feeling Maria likely endured in smaller, daily doses. She didn't need a handout. She deserved an opportunity. She deserved to be seen not as a cleaner, but as the compassionate leader she had unknowingly proven herself to be. He realized that genuine help wasn't about solving someone's problems for them. It was about empowering them to solve their own. It is often in such moments of deep reflection that our true purpose becomes clear. And if you believe in the power of these journeys, your subscription helps us continue to share them. Over the next few days, Arthur mobilized his immense resources. He was not just a wealthy man, he was an industrial titan with a network that could move mountains with a single phone call. Through a series of discreet inquiries handled by his most trusted legal team, he began to piece together the story of Maria Flores. He learned of her grueling schedule, juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet for her and her son. He learned about 8-year-old Leo, a bright boy with a passion for science. He discovered the stack of unpaid medical bills from when Leo had broken his arm the previous year, a crushing debt that kept Maria awake at night. He learned of her quiet dignity and her reputation among colleagues as someone who always offered help, even when she had nothing to spare. The more Arthur discovered, the more his admiration for her grew, and the more his audacious plan solidified in his mind. This was no longer just about rewarding a single act of kindness. It was about investing in a person of extraordinary character. He contacted the corporate headquarters of the superstore chain, not as a disgruntled customer, but as a major investor exploring a new acquisition. His name opened doors that were sealed to everyone else. He arranged a meeting, insisting it take place not in their sterile corporate offices, but at the very store where it had all begun. He requested the presence of the regional director, the store manager Mark, and, most importantly, the cleaning staff employee, Maria Flores. The request was so bizarre, it sent ripples of confusion through the corporate hierarchy, but no one dared to question Arthur Blackwood. Maria received the summons with a heavy heart and a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. A mandatory meeting with the regional director and her own manager could only mean one thing: she was being fired. The incident with the old man must have been the final straw. All day, anxiety gnawed at her. How would she tell Leo? How would they possibly pay the rent next month? A part of her wanted to run, to simply not show up, but that wasn't her way. She had done nothing wrong. She had acted with compassion, and if that was a fireable offense, she would face the consequences with her head held high. She put on her cleanest uniform, tied her hair back neatly, and walked toward the manager's office, her heart pounding but her resolve firm, ready to face whatever came next. When Maria entered the small, sterile manager's office, the air was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like a physical weight. The regional director, a man in a perfectly pressed suit, sat stiffly in a chair, his face a mask of nervous curiosity. Mark stood beside his desk, his own cheap suit looking even more inadequate than usual, a sheen of cold sweat glistening on his forehead. He couldn't meet her eyes, but it was the third man in the room who made the air crackle with an unspoken authority. He stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling parking lot, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her car. When he turned, Maria's breath caught in her throat. It was the old man from the checkout line, but the stooped shoulders and weary gaze were gone, replaced by a posture of immense power and eyes that held a sharp, piercing intelligence. Mark began to stammer, his words tumbling out in a desperate, sycophantic rush. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding the other day. If I had known who you were, I would have—" Arthur raised a single hand, a small, quiet gesture that instantly silenced the room. He didn't even glance at Mark. His dismissal so complete it was more devastating than any verbal reprimand. His entire focus, calm and unwavering, settled on Maria, who stood frozen by the door, her mind racing to connect the frail man she had helped with the titan of industry. Standing before her, the regional director shifted uncomfortably, a silent spectator in a drama he clearly did not understand. Arthur took a step forward, his voice low, but carrying an undeniable weight that filled the small office. "Maria," he began, his tone now devoid of any pretense, carrying a quiet respect she had never heard from anyone in a position of power. "A few days ago, in this very store, I stood at a checkout counter unable to afford a simple loaf of bread. Your manager," he said, with a brief, dismissive flick of his eyes toward Mark, "offered me contempt. He saw a problem. A nuisance holding up his line. You, on the other hand, offered me dignity." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, a stark contrast between two worldviews. "Some people are trained to see value only in profit margins and sales figures. You, it seems, instinctively see the value in people. And that is why, starting today, you will no longer be an employee of this place. You will be the owner." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by a soft gasp from Maria. Her mind reeled, unable to process the words. Owner, it was impossible, a dream or a cruel joke. But the look in Arthur Blackwood's eyes was deadly serious. He went on to explain, his voice steady and clear, that he had spent the last 2 days finalizing the acquisition of this specific superstore branch. It was now a privately held entity under his portfolio, and he was placing it entirely under her control. There was, however, one condition. She was to use a portion of the profits to create and implement a new program dedicated to genuine employee appreciation and community support, ensuring that no one who worked or shopped there ever felt as invisible and humiliated as he had. It was not a gift, he clarified, but an investment in her character. Mark finally seemed to shrink, his ambition and arrogance dissolving into a puddle of pure dread. Arthur turned to the regional director and spoke with a chilling finality. "You can handle his severance. He is no longer needed here." Without another word to the disgraced manager, he turned his full attention back to Maria, whose eyes were now shining with unshed tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. The fear that had gripped her heart all morning was gone, replaced by a dawning sense of possibility so vast it was almost terrifying. She had acted from a simple impulse of kindness, a quiet refusal to let another human being be diminished. She never could have imagined that this small, silent act of defiance would be the key that unlocked an entirely new life, not just for her, but for everyone she would now have the power to lead. Her journey of quiet struggle had just reached a profound and unexpected turning point, and it reminded her of a lesson she often taught her son. True strength is found in how you lift others up, a truth that echoes in every story of unexpected grace. Subscribing allows us to keep telling them. The transition was not instantaneous, but it was profound. Maria, initially overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her new responsibility, found her footing not in spreadsheets or profit projections, but in people. Her first act as owner was to call a store-wide meeting, not in the cramped office, but right there on the sales floor. She spoke of respect, of dignity, and of building a place where both employees and customers felt seen. She implemented a living wage, flexible hours for parents, and a small fund for employees facing personal emergencies. The oppressive atmosphere, once thick with Mark's ambition, began to dissipate, replaced by a collaborative spirit. The employees, who had once moved with the weary shuffle of obligation, now walked with a lighter step, their smiles genuine. Arthur watched from a distance, his heart filled with a quiet, profound satisfaction. He hadn't just bought a store, he had ignited a community. Inspired by the ripple effect of Maria's single gesture, Arthur poured his energy into a new purpose. He established the Eleanor Blackwood Foundation, a unique organization with a simple but radical mission: to seek out and amplify small, anonymous acts of kindness. He assembled a small, dedicated team to find people like Maria, individuals who offered help without any expectation of reward, and provide them with the resources to turn their compassion into tangible, community-altering change. It was his tribute to the woman who had always believed in the world's hidden goodness. The cynical experiment that had started in the cold aisles of the superstore was now a nationwide endeavor. The emptiness that had haunted his mansion for a decade was finally filled, not with noise or possessions, but with the quiet, steady work of honoring his wife's legacy. His life, once a monument to solitude, found a new, vibrant center. He became a fixture in Maria's life, not as a benefactor, but as family. He spent afternoons at her small, cozy apartment, helping 8-year-old Leo build intricate model rockets and explaining the stars. He saw the same spark of kindness in the boy's eyes that he had first seen in his mother's. In return, Maria and Leo brought laughter and warmth back into his cavernous home, filling the silence with the simple joys of shared meals and stories. He was no longer just Arthur Blackwood, the corporate titan. He was Art, the man who brought the best ice cream and told the most interesting stories about his travels. He had sought to prove a cynical point about the world, and had instead found a daughter and a grandson. 2 years later, the superstore was unrecognizable. It was a thriving hub of the community, known for its friendly staff and its Kindness Action of the Month board, which celebrated compassionate acts by employees and customers alike. At the annual Employee Appreciation Party, Arthur sat at a picnic table, a genuine smile gracing his features as he watched Leo. Now Tenny proudly show off his science fair trophy. Near the entrance, a young cashier noticed an elderly woman struggling to count her change. Instead of showing impatience, the cashier quietly swiped her own employee discount card to cover the difference, whispering, "Don't worry about it. We all have tough days." The cycle of goodness had taken root, a living testament to the fact that one small gesture can indeed change the world. Stories like this remind us of the power we all hold, and by subscribing, you help us ensure these vital reminders continue to be shared.